I'll tell you something too that I've never really discussed. I think there were some key mistakes by the attorneys that happened to accidentally get some documents in my possession. When outlets stay so siloed, it allows the administration to, if you will, kind of hide if it doesn't get picked up by other outlets, such that it brings the issue to a wider audience. It lowers the pressure that the media can bring as a whole.
Today on Voices of Reason, we're pleased to be joined by Todd Shepherd, investigative reporter with Broad and Liberty. Todd began his career in radio in Oklahoma City and Denver, Colorado. He's been an investigative reporter with the Independent Institute in Colorado, has also written for the Washington Examiner, the Free Beacon, and served as the editor for the Delaware Valley Journal before joining the team at Broad and Liberty. Todd, thanks for taking time to join us today on Voices of Reason.
Yeah, you bet, Steve. Thanks for having me.
You know, just before we start, we were talking a little bit about investigative reporting. Now, those in the business know what investigative reporting is, the difference between what, say, someone like myself does at Politics PA, where you're writing about daily events, daily headlines. Investigative journalism takes much more time than 24 hours, doesn't it?
It does. You know, I've been surprised at the number of times where I guess it's just because I live in the press world, right? But I'll introduce myself to someone, and of course they ask what I do when I say investigative reporting. You know, investigative. What do you really mean by that? And what we're talking about here is, you know, a regular reporter might go to a press conference that a politician gives, and they'll write up what's said, or they might go to a crime scene and describe the activity there. And it's really just sort of reporting on what you see in those first couple of hours, and you don't have a lot of time to go beyond what you get in those first few hours. And you really, in some cases, you don't have time to question the things that you're being told. An investigative reporter really, you know, they're not the kind of person that gets dispatched to a house fire or to a crime scene, or really even a big, you know, maybe a bill signing, because they're going through documents. They're trying to obtain documents, government documents, using freedom of information laws. They're trying to build trust with sources who might be reluctant to talk, you know, and that alone, it can be a process of a month, right? I mean, it could take weeks to identify the person. It could take more time just to identify their phone number or their address to be able to reach out to them. And then it might take a couple of weeks to persuade them that talking would not only be in their interest, but it'd just be in the interest of the public at large if they help this story get told. So when you put all of those things together, you know, an investigative report, although someone might be able to sit down and read it in 10 to 15 minutes, it's oftentimes something that took a month, maybe as long as 6 months to a year to produce. Sometimes, in rare cases, longer than that.
You know, as we mentioned at the outset, you started in radio and then began investigative reporting. Was there a step in between, or how did you make the move from just regular reporting, perhaps into investigative work?
I remember this day so clearly that I was, as you mentioned, I worked in Denver, and in the afternoon there was this show that was hosted by two lawyers, and I thought it was a really fun show. One was kind of on the right, and one was on the left, but they were very good friends. And at the time, they were really digging into a scandal at the University of Colorado. And I was jealous of some of the scoops that they were getting. And I'll admit that look, I adore the education I got at my alma mater, but I didn't get a really good tutelage into how to work open records laws. My education was very focused on radio and TV journalism and the many things that go into that. So I asked these guys, hey, how do you do that? And so this one attorney gave me kind of like a 5-minute tutorial on how to file a Colorado Open Records Act. And after that, like, it just became, to me, I thought, this is the greatest tool a journalist has. You know, I mean, this is the door. This is how you get behind closed doors to really learn the secrets. And so, I mean, since then, I probably filed, I don't know, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 open records requests in Colorado. And as I talk to you now, I glance over to my other screen. My right to know tracker in Pennsylvania is up to 400, and my next request will be request 425. So
It's amazing to hear that. And I guess a lot of people also don't exactly know what the right to know law provides in that respect, what government needs to, in some respects, make available, or I guess in other respects, things that they don't want you to uncover.
yeah, listen, you're opening a door here where I could talk for way too long because I'm very evangelical about public records laws. And yes, I am that way for journalists, but I'm especially that way for citizens. And I'll tell you that if there was really one just encouraging moment, was that the year or two in the beginning of and the year after the pandemic, because at that moment you could see so many citizens learning about the right to know law and how to ask their school district to prove some of the things that they were saying, or how to ask their county commissioners. You said you got, a bunch of gloves, or, did you really? And so it is an incredible tool, and it's really one of the few select. Look, if you were to look at the Pennsylvania statutes, almost all of that law gives government the power over its citizens, right? Like if you do this incorrectly, we can fine you or we can arrest you. The right to know law is a law that puts the law in the citizen's hand, and it says when we presume that documents made by a government are open, and that when you ask for them, you have the right to them. Now, there are legal exclusions, legal exceptions. So if a document meets one of those exceptions, the government doesn't have to turn it over. But by and large, there's a presumption of openness, and it is a great tool for citizens to use to understand how to really get more information on what their government is doing.
So I guess the next question obviously would be, do you get a tip from someone to investigate? Do you just kind of, lack of a better phrase, throw spaghetti at a wall with a right to know to see that I read something, I'm hearing something, not necessarily from a tipster, and let's just see if something is uncovered. How's it all come about?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a blend. There are a lot of obviously, say, for example, just the people who work with me at Broad and Liberty get tips of things that they hear. But oftentimes I look for stories where something seems to be just like the words out of the officials match don't really seem to line up with what's going on. Or sometimes I might look for stories where I can tell that the reporter is, they're just too hurried to have the time really to dig deeper. And I'm not saying like trying to attack them or anything. It's just like you start to learn some of these people's beats, and you just learn that, like, say, a Capitol reporter, most of them, they're really running from press conference to press conference, from hearing to hearing, committee hearing to committee hearing, and they're covering so much of stuff that's just being said out in the open that it's just not their place really, or they don't have the time, like I said, to sit down. Because I should say, for all of what I just said about the glowing things about the right to know law, you do have to word them carefully and with some thought in order to have a good chance of them really coming back with some documents that will inform you. And so um, it's, filing a good right to know request sounds like a simple thing. You just say, I want this document. I really will. I'll write it in the morning. I'll come back to it in the afternoon and try to test it again. And then I might even wait another day to make sure, come back after a night of sleep and say, does this really fit? And I will tell you, with the advent of AI I've been really surprised at how well I can tell an AI tool, this is what I'm thinking of requesting. Do you see any holes here? And we'll play with 2 or 3 versions of the wording before I'll find a result that I'm happy with.
Well, we are thrilled as part of the Politics PA being part of the Broad and Liberty family to congratulate Todd. He received a first place award from the Keystone Media Association for investigative reporting, looking into the administrative failures with 2 suicides at the Delaware County Prison following the 2022 decision for Delaware County to take over direct control of the prison. First of all, Todd, congratulations, but then how did that all come together?
You know, Broad and Liberty is obviously, by the name, you can tell it's very Philadelphia centric, but we're also focused on the collar counties. The Democrats who came into power in Delaware County over the county council, starting mostly in 2020, I mean, they campaigned on deprivatizing the George W. Hill Correctional Facility. It had been privately run for almost 30 years. And so we knew that this was going to happen. But this really, Steve, kind of gets back to your question of how do you pick the things. We just had a general feeling that there was this assumption by a lot of people, by these elected officials, and also by some other media outlets in the area, that there was a lot of buy-in to this idea that the privatized employees were heartless, cold, cruel, and immoral, and that if we could just put government employees in there, they would be angels who were errorless and made no mistakes. And so we had a suspicion that there would be a lack of oversight based on that. And I think the award bears that out to some degree. I don't want to make this attack on other outlets or anything. And I should also say thank you for your kind words. It'd be rude of me not to. Thank you very much. But we just, we had a suspicion. And I'll tell you something too that I've never really discussed because I've talked about, like, for example, I was on, Steve, help me, I'm blanking on the name here, the channel that does all the PA politics in Harrisburg.
PCN, yes.
PCN, thanks.
Yep.
I don't know why I was blanking on that. But I mean, I did like a 10-minute interview with PCN on these a couple of years ago. But, one of the things is, one of the mistakes that the prison made in the early days was their legal counsel. Obviously, there had to be a shift in legal counsel, and their legal counsel really wasn't up to speed on the right to know law. And they gave me some documents that they could have protected. And these documents were really kind of damning, really exposed some loopholes, or not some loopholes, but some management mistakes. And by the way, both of my reports and the documents that I presented are now the part of lawsuits, as the families of these suicide victims are suing the prison. So that tells you how important the documents were. But I just think it's funny that, the stories themselves are about mistakes of the prison management. But sort of what's been untold about the story is, I think there were some key mistakes by the attorneys that happened to accidentally get some documents in my possession. And then there was a propitious moment where a source reached out to me. And this source was incredibly knowledgeable on just about every aspect of daily prison life. And I shared a lot of these documents with that person. And this person, because of their incredible knowledge of the facility, this person was able to make sense and really just line up a lot of things that I hadn't had the time to thread together. And that's what made the stories work. I will tell you, I was really happy to text that person after I found out that I won. And I said, I hope you will share in this award with me, because I couldn't have done this without you.
We also want to add that Broad and Liberty was also included with some of the top news gathering organizations in the state, including the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. So certainly, Todd, kudos to you. One of the things I think people often wonder about after a story appears, there are always going to be those who will back authority and say, I can't believe that you found this. There are always those who will say, I can't believe this wasn't discovered earlier. Do you usually get like a 50-50 feedback after a story like this runs, or how's that all come together?
I would say in my time at Broad and Liberty in particular, the feedback is 90% positive, and usually it's people with additional evidence. The people who have some sort of complaint about the article, they don't usually take the time to email, they just put it in the comments. But I would say that, look, I understand why an outlet like the Inquirer doesn't keep a comments section anymore. People have so many avenues to comment. They can comment on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. X, which I hate that name. I wish we could go back to Twitter.
Twitter, I agree.
Yeah, but you know, uh, but I think having those avenues and monitoring those discussions are important because people do they do find a lot of correction. They do find errors or maybe they find characters. They have a complaint about a characterization, and we do try to monitor those, so that we can correct or upgrade the language, I guess you might say. But I would say in my almost 4 years now at Broad and Liberty that usually the feedback we get is pretty positive, and usually it's people who are saying, "Hey, wait, I've got a case that's just identical. Can you please look at it?" That really, we've talked about the difficulties of the job. That one of the most difficult things I have to do is to turn away from a really quality report. Like I had at the beginning of the year, I had an incredible quality tip on something in Lackawanna County, and I just basically had to turn away from it because it would have taken 9 to 10 months of work, and because it was a little bit outside of our coverage area, but it was an astonishing story. And when you have to turn away from something like that, it weighs on you.
That's really interesting to hear because what it is kind of thing. What do you take and what don't you take? I think that's important for our listeners to know as well. You also had something that broke, I believe it was a year or so ago, involving Governor Shapiro and a past aide of his. When that story broke, it certainly drew attention statewide. What kind of response did you get to that from that? Did you get people in Harrisburg coming out of their cubby holes and saying we've got more? Or did you just find that the administration kind of went more into a shell?
No, the administration went more into a shell. I will tell you, like just speaking in some of the most generic terms possible. Um, One of the things that's been eye-opening for me working in the Pennsylvania market, and I have loved all of the 5 years now that I've worked, reporting on Pennsylvania politics. Um, there is there is a far less of an inclination to share news content or to report on the content that others have created. For example, like you mentioned that I worked for a think tank in Colorado, and so I published independently. It was not uncommon for the Denver Post to see my reports and to pick up on it and say, Shepherd reported this. That does not happen, and it just doesn't. You might see, a Harrisburg outlet give a nod to the Inquirer, but other than that, it's miserly, if I can, and so I think, but I think that also plays into your question in terms of what the administration does. That when outlets stay so siloed, it allows the administration to, if you will, kind of hide. Like, when we would drive at a question with the administration and we would produce stories on this, if it doesn't get picked up by other outlets such that it brings the issue to a wider audience, it really it's kind of a shame. Like it just it lowers the pressure that the media can bring as a whole.
Certainly, where I'm located in Lancaster is 40 minutes from Harrisburg, but Harrisburg will never be mistaken as one of the largest cities in the Commonwealth. Is this location one of the reasons why it can remain so sheltered, or is it just the nature of how we do business in Pennsylvania?
I think it's the nature of how business gets done. I mean, it's very difficult to explain to someone that's never really thought about the life of a reporter and why would you. But I mean, for example, there are just these different ethos that happen in these different areas. For example, when I first got to Denver, someone told me early on, we are a no flag town. And what that means is, so like if you go to a press conference and you see 5 or 6 microphones being held up to the public official, or let's say even the head coach, right? Like you might see the little flag that says AM 740 or whatever, right? Like when in Denver at the time, at least, maybe it's changed, but that was frowned on. That was like you're being pushy, you're kind of because what you're doing is if the TV station is there, you're trying to get a little ad on to the TV viewer to listen to your sports radio station, right?
Right.
And again, I mean, like that was just the ethos there. Hey, don't stick your little advertisement into my shot, right? Um, and so these things just play out. They build up over decades, and they become like the unwritten rules of baseball. Maybe you know what they are, maybe you don't, but somehow everybody kind of halfway abides by them. And if you don't abide by them, they throw a pitch at your head, and you learn. So what can I say?
Well, I want to make sure. I mean, one of the things when we get together during staff meetings, we don't talk baseball because I'm a Phillies fan, and Todd is not. He's a fan of, I believe, that Colorado baseball team. But Todd has been able to lord over most of us the fact that his beloved Oklahoma City Thunder came away with the NBA championship. So here's your chance to crow just a bit as we begin to wrap things up.
I just you know, I'll say this: if I don't buy, I'm not a jersey buying guy. But if I were, I would buy one of those customizable jerseys, and I wouldn't put my own name on the back. I would put Presti. Sam Presti is not only the best general manager in the NBA, he is the best general manager in professional sports, if you ask me. And he is the MVP of that championship and what I hope might be maybe another. I don't know.
And I will throw this out there for all of us that attended small Division III colleges, just like Sam Presti did. We're all very proud of what he was able to accomplish. Todd, anything else that you'd like to mention? I mean, the congratulations once again on the award. Investigative journalism as a career, is this something that you think that is still, given the way that print journalism is going today and digital journalism, I guess, as well, is there still a place for it?
It is getting tougher and tougher because the market, not only the financial elements of the market, but just the architecture of how people get their communication now in these bite-sized chunks through Twitter, through 10-second videos on Instagram. It makes in-depth reporting like this less feasible, really. You have to have investors really that are patient with a return on investment. So it's getting tougher. Is there anything else I would like to say? Absolutely. And that is the two stories that I submitted that won first place in this investigative reporting contest. In both of those stories, family members from each of those family suicides spoke with me on the record. And again, I realize that is very, very difficult to do. Like when you have never interacted with a reporter and you hear these stories or you see these portrayals on press that, they sensationalize your quotes or they take you out of context or whatever, it can be you can have a lot of hesitation or, worries about how this is going to play out. And so in this case, I had two wonderful families that like I said, they just opened themselves up emotionally to me. And they had to trust from the beginning that I would tell their story at least mostly accurate. And that's such a vulnerability. And they did that. And without them, these stories they just wouldn't matter. And so I have emailed them both, and I said, I hope you will, feel as though you are a part of this award, because I just couldn't do it without you. And I say it again now because you're on the phone and you cry with these people. I'm not kidding. You do. They tell you something that just hits you in a way, and it's like an arrow to your heart, and you cry on the phone with them. And so I just say thanks to Janet Owens and to Patty and Pam Langworthy for giving me so much of their time and just opening themselves up to me.
Our thanks to award-winning investigative journalist Todd Shepherd from Broad and Liberty for spending some time with us today on Voices of Reason. Todd, thanks again.
Thanks, Steve.